Hey painting friends, it's Stoof here. I'm in Shenandoah River State Park and I'm going to do some plein air painting for you guys. I'm working on an 8-inch by 12-inch canvas today and I'm going to try to keep this in under 1 hour, but as you can see we have perfect conditions. It's about 5 p.m. here, so we still have a few more hours of daylight. The clouds are moving kind of quickly though, so that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but it's not very windy and it's very calm and peaceful, so this is going to be a fun one. And for my paints today, I'm using oil paints. I'm using quite a few colors today. We have titanium white, dioxazine purple, burnt umber, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, cadmium yellow, lemon yellow, or like a yellow light Hansa. Either one of those would work. This is like a turquoise blue. We have sap green, phthalo green, phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, and Naples orange. I'm also using my citrus solvents, and for my brushes today, I'm going to sketch out the concept with this like number 2 round tip brush, and then I'm using a couple different, we got a flat tip brush, we got a little filbert brush, and a liner brush. I might use that for some of the little branches, and this is what we're painting. So we've got my viewfinder here. I have this set to 8-inch by 12-inch dimensions. I'm thinking I want to keep this similar to what you're seeing right now, with the lower third being the river and the top third being the sky and that river bank on the right side there. After getting my materials out, the first step in starting this painting was to look through that viewfinder, determine what was going to fit the composition on the canvas, and then I held up that viewfinder as I was sketching out the concept on the canvas, making sure things were where I wanted to place them in the painting. As I mentioned, I wanted to keep that river, the lower third section of the canvas, and the sky about the upper third of the canvas. And I liked that riverbank that was closest to me on the right side, not to come quite halfway, to take up maybe the right quarter of the canvas. So I continued to look through my viewfinder and then sketch out the concept onto this canvas using thinned down oil paint. After sketching out the concept, the next step was to start painting in the details in the background of the painting and then making my way to the foreground. I use the word details there, but I'm not getting too detailed with this plein air painting. One of the tricky parts of plein air painting is trying to capture the light as you're seeing it, light and colors, and because things are changing constantly in front of you in real life time, you don't want to get caught up in details. You want to focus more on the big picture, main shapes and colors and values, just to block in everything and then go back and start to add some detail after some of the light features have changed slightly from what you originally had. You have to use your imagination sometimes when plein air painting, or try to paint things accurately to how they looked when you first blocked that feature in. As you can see here, I sped up the painting a bit. As I'm working on these couple of clouds in the painting, the clouds in real life are moving pretty fast. So I decided to just block in one of those main clouds that's kind of centered right in the composition on the painting, and a little bit of fluffy clouds veering off to the left and right of the canvas as well, just so it doesn't look perfectly framed there. After getting that sky blocked in, I started to work on the mountain in the far distance, and as I kept working on this, things were getting trickier than I anticipated. It had been quite some time since I started a plein air painting this late in the day, and with those clouds moving and blocking out the sunlight, it was changing how the mountains in front of me appeared. They would have light touching them on the ridge on the far side from me, farther away from the viewer, when the sunlight was out through the clouds, and then when the clouds were blocking the sunlight, everything became more muted, and it became a little bit more difficult to differentiate between the middle ground hills and the background mountains. So I had a trickier time than I thought I would with this plein air painting. If I could do this over again, I think I would have come back earlier in the day so that I didn't have quite as drastic changing light conditions. I did end up taking a little bit longer than I wanted to. I spent about an hour and 45 minutes working on this small plein air painting, and by the time I was almost done, the sun had dropped quite a ways in the sky and was almost setting behind those trees on the right side of the riverbank. And there was a glare from the sun on the river coming into my eyes, which made me squint a lot, blink a lot, have watery eyes. So although this was a very peaceful spot to paint, and I really enjoyed starting this painting, it became challenging very quickly. But before I get ahead of myself, let me continue talking about the process. After getting that background stuff painted in, I started to work on more of the middle ground and the foreground. As I mentioned, the lighting conditions kept changing, but I did want to follow the basic principles of landscape painting, which was to keep things in the background cooler, have a little bit less saturation, less contrast, and the features closer to the viewer tend to have more contrast, more warmth in features that are illuminated by sunlight, and deeper shadows. So although things kept changing in front of me and I wanted to keep going back and manipulating things to make them match what I was seeing at the time, I still was trying to follow those general principles of painting so that when the piece was done, I still wanted to have it read realistically. Once we made it towards the end of that plein air painting session, as I mentioned, I wasn't happy with the way that the piece turned out. I think that the mountains were painted more during the time where the clouds were blocking the sunlight, and the sky ended up looking a little bit more like the sunlight was illuminating and keeping things nice and bright and cheery. So I felt like things didn't read perfectly accurately. I also felt that I made the angle of the hillside and the middle ground a bit too steep, so I let this piece dry after this plein air painting session was done, and then I brought it back to my art studio where I touched up the piece, and I am happy with the finished result now. Back in the studio, I lightened that mountain in the distance closer to the valley to help add separation between that mountain in the background and the hillside in the foreground and left side of the painting. I also did a bit of work to warm up the colors of the greens in that middle ground area. In the reference videos and photos, there is a bit more warm brown, cool red type colors mixed in with the greens in that section. So I tried to incorporate a bit more of those colors. I did a bit of work to boost the value variation in that middle ground and the foreground as well. I made the shadows deeper and helped add that contrast that really separated that middle ground from the mountains in the distance. I worked on warming up some of the highlights on the greens in the trees lining the river on the left side. Also added a bit more detail here using that number 1 round tip brush to get the individual little clusters of leaves. And by doing all this work, I felt that I made the whole piece a bit more cohesive, with the sky showing the highlights on the clouds where the sun was hitting it. I added more Naples yellow since I forgot to put Naples yellow on my palette for plein air painting. I added some Naples yellow into the sky as well to give that later in the day kind of hazy glow close to the horizon line. So I warmed up the sky a bit, added a bit more haze between the background mountains and middle ground mountains, added more contrast to the mountains, hills in the middle ground area, boosted some of the highlights again, added some more warmth and variation to my colors, added more detail using smaller brushes and more refined brush strokes. And I did some work to that tree on the riverbank on the right side as well, just to add more detail there. I deepened those shadows some more now that I could layer over the sky and didn't have to worry about things blending with the sky in the background. Boosted some of those highlights where the light was on the side farther away from me, and then added deeper shadows on that tree on the right side as well. So overall, I worked on this entire piece for about 3 hours, about an hour and a half for plein air, about an hour and a half in the studio, until I was happy with the finished result. This painting is now drying in the studio, and I'm going to have it available for sale shortly on my website, stephmoracafineart.com. So thanks for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my experience plein air painting this time. I did struggle a bit more than normal with this one, most likely just because I picked a scene that was later in the day, but it was a great exercise for me to focus more on getting the basic shapes, colors, and values on the painting rather than getting sucked into details, which is something that we all still struggle with, I think. So that wraps up this video for today. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future painting tutorials and tips like this video. Have a wonderful day and happy painting!